Here I am. George Knapp is here, and he really is. I was joking about it earlier, but he really is a legend in his own time. He is an amazing man who was a mainstream reporter in Las Vegas, an investigative, albeit eventually an investigative reporter, but quite a guy. And then suddenly, in the way that I did, in the way that I turned Coast from what it was to what it is, George kind of did the same thing. It's been a very strange career track for George. We'll talk about all of that and a lot more in a moment. A lot of people wouldn't know it, but George and I actually go back quite a ways. We've been in meetings that I can't describe with Bob Bigelow and all kinds of interesting things. So we've been at it for a while. George, what happened to your career? I mean, if you go way back, how in the world did you get from point A to B?
Well, it's sort of like you, Art. Remember Area 2000?
Yes, very well.
That goes back, what, 93?
Sure.
It's sort of like with you. I mean, I stumbled onto a story about Area 51. I approached it the same way I'd approach any other story, and it's pretty much changed my life. Now, I'm still a mainstream reporter. I don't do a lot of UFO stuff. There's no prohibition by my employers, but they prefer me to do other things, and I do a reasonable job at it here in my hometown. But I guess I'll always be known as a UFO reporter because of those stories we did back in 1989. May will mark 18 years since those first reports about Area 51 sort of helped put it on the map, the whole Lazar stuff.
Well, of course, the whole nation.
Parallels to you, Art.
Yeah, there are. The whole nation didn't hear about Area 51. They didn't hear those early reports, George. You know, the first one you did must have been rough. I mean, really rough.
Well, yeah, and it was amazing how it touched the pulse of the public, the reaction from the public, how much interest there was from just people on the street, just everywhere. I mean, the phones rang off the hook, and then other media beat a path to Area 51's door, and I took a lot of grief over it. Sure, I still get grief when someone has a problem with me, some politician that I'm going after. They'll always whip out the flying saucer, little green men stuff, ha, ha, ha.
Sure.
I don't mind, because I work for the people, the public. They want to know about this stuff, so I don't craft my reports for politicians or other journalists.
No, I can understand why they whip that one out, of course, and it's done to me. But it's a lot easier for me because it's my bread and butter. I do this. This is all I really do. For you, you've got to occasionally switch from very mainstream to Area 51, for example. That's a much tougher path for you.
Yeah, I suppose so. But, as long as you keep focused and try to approach the topic the same way you would any other news subject, you can't get in that much trouble. I mean, you catch some grief here and there from people that wish you ill, but I don't mind.
Yeah, I approach it the same way. Area 51, is it still there?
Well, of course, it's there. It's still a vital base in our national security apparatus. It is still as busy as ever, contrary to some erroneous reports. The planes leave the Janet terminal every day and fly out there, and they fly back at night. The buses still go up that dirt road. There are thousands of people there. You can see from satellite photos that they've installed new facilities. They're expanding, building things underground. It's there.
There was this big story, George, as you know. There was a big story that, what was going on at Area 51 had been moved to somewhere in Utah or somewhere in New Mexico or whatever. You're saying it's not true.
Right. I think that guy from Popular Mechanics went up a wrong road, found nobody there, and concluded that Area 51 had somehow shut down. And boy, was he mistaken. I think perhaps the stuff we're talking about, if in fact there were ever any recovered alien vehicles out there, that they probably have been moved somewhere else or stuck in a closet somewhere, for the simple reason that so many people still go out there looking for it. So if you wanted to test fly that stuff, it would seem you'd have to find a place deeper in the test site or some other base without so much attention.
From the investigation you did do way back when, is there any doubt in your mind that they were flying craft and testing craft that had been recovered or obtained one way or the other from elsewhere?
Well, I suppose there will always be some doubt. I lean toward that being the case. I mean, it was not just Bob Lazar. I had more than 24 people who have worked out there over the years who've told me bits and pieces of the same story, witnesses who've seen these things flying around, people who have worked on the program and seen things inside hangars and know that we were taking these things apart to figure out how they worked, not the other way around. So I believe that it was there at some point. Can I prove it conclusively? No.
If you could go back now and not do those reports and not get involved with Area 51, Bob Lazar, John Lear, the whole thing, if you could just erase it and not do it, would you?
Oh, no, I'd do the same thing. I might do a better job of it, but there's no question that I would do it. It's just opened so much up for me, not only as a journalist, but as a human being, and opened my eyes to a lot of stuff that I might not have otherwise seen.
Yeah, I bet. All right, now the ranch. When you finally did get access to the ranch, did you see enough? Did you investigate yourself enough to become a believer that what these stories that we were hearing were indeed happening?
Very much so. In part because of the credibility of Bob Bigelow and the people that work with NIDS. I mean, these are serious guys. They weren't out looking for attention. They were trying to investigate this stuff. And then going up there and interviewing witnesses. Talking to neighbors, people who live in the area, researching the history of it. People wonder if this is a government psychological warfare campaign or something like that. This stuff has been going on in that region before there was a U.S. government. Father Escalante, who had his sightings and wrote about them in his journal, that was back in 1776. Native American traditions say it's been going on a lot longer than that. So, it's not a government operation. It's there. It's real. I've interviewed enough people to be convinced of that, plus the evidence collected by the folks at NIDS over a 7-year intensive study. I mean, that area is the most intensely studied paranormal hotspot in history.
Any guesses? If you had to guess, and I am asking you to guess, what do you think is going on there?
It's, and this is purely a guess. We tried to rule out more things than as opposed to coming to a conclusion because there's not enough evidence to demonstrate something conclusively, but it seems dimensional. It seems like this is a portal of some sort. The rancher, Tom Gorman, recalled seeing what looked like a sun in the sky through which objects would enter and leave, and on the other side of this big orange ball sun-like object, he could see another sky. It suggests that maybe there are other worlds out there, parallel universe, alternate dimensions. I'm not smart enough to be able to figure that stuff out, but as we mentioned in the book, it's sort of consistent with some of the research on the cutting edge of physics and cosmology right now, the concept of the multiverse.
That's right.
It fits, it fits. There's a physicist named Dr. Jack Sarfati, who's a regular listener of this program, who he read the book and it sort of light bulb went off. It sort of fits with where modern science is heading about the nature of our reality. And it seems like what's going on at the ranch is kind of a learning curve, that they're giving us a little bit of rope and dragging us along a bit at a time so that we somehow understand that the reality isn't what it used to be, that the world is a much bigger, more mysterious, and more complex place than we ever imagined.
You carried cameras up there. Did you ever catch anything that you could air?
No. Well, we've got stuff that we can air, but if you're asking me, do I ever catch anything anomalous on camera? Mm-hmm. No.
Yes.
I do have some of the stuff from NIDS archives, the mutilation incidents and tracks and things of that sort. We interviewed a lot of witnesses up there. We interviewed NIDS staffers, collected a great deal of material for this documentary that one of these days I'll get finished, but nothing like a flying saucer, no. My buddy Colum, one of the first trips I made up there, my pal Colum, he decides that I have this inherent weirdness quotient and that maybe I might make something happen. So he takes me out in the middle homestead where a lot of this strange stuff had happened, where that tunnel of light had appeared, where animals had been butchered and others disappeared, where a predator-type object had materialized and scared the bejesus out of everyone. It's the middle of the night. And he puts me on a chair there and leaves me to see if something comes to get me. Now, before this, yeah, my pal, right? Before this, we had done some things that in the past had riled this entity up. We got a big earth mover and dug around a lot of dirt. That seems to get its attention. We built a big fire, made a bunch of noise, tried to get its attention, and then plopped me out on a chair for a while in the middle of nowhere and left me. So I'd like to tell you that I was brave and I wasn't concerned at all, but I was. I mean, it was a scary thing. And the only thing
you were like chum in the water.
Yeah. The only thing that came to get me were mosquitoes, though. So I'm happy to report.
Okay, back to Mr. Bigelow for a moment. He's quite a guy, and Ross, I get these little messages. I do the program here. Ross in West Palm Beach, Florida, said, Art, I'm looking at Mr. Bigelow's website right now, and honestly, Mr. Bigelow reminds me of S.R. Haddon, the billionaire in the movie, your favorite movie, mine, Contact, and I've been saying that for years. He really does remind me of H.R. Haddon. How about you?
Yeah, that fits. I got a tour of his facility out there right from the first day that it was built, and I've been there many times, and he invited us to be there on the morning of the launch. And Bob Bigelow had never done a TV interview before. I know he's spoken to you many times, and we got him to go on camera, and he was good at it. And now we are negotiating to get him on camera to talk about the ranch, and when I can get that nailed down, that'll be a coup.
Oh, it certainly will be, and quite a story. My God, what a story that'll be! And
well, it's everything. It's a paranormal Disneyland. It's the UFO stuff of everything from Winnebago-sized UFOs to flying sombreros to the balls of light that Colin talked about. It's poltergeist type stuff. It's a laundry list of strange things, and it's a heck of a story for a newsman.
Boy, it really is. There have been sort of offshoots to all of this, and the early stuff involved Bob Lazar, John Lear. Now, from today's perspective, as the story has unfolded and bits and pieces have either been confirmed or refuted over the years, I guess I've got to ask, what is your take on the two of them, Bob Lazar and John Lear?
Well, on Lazar, I know that the world of ufology has pretty made up its mind that Bob is not truthful, and I don't think it's as simple as that. Now, there are gaps in his story and things that don't add up. For example, I always have said from day one that the weakest part of his story dealt with his lack of academic credentials. The schools that he went to say he was never there, and Bob has never gone to any great lengths to prove that he was there. However, I lived through this stuff. I know the strange things that were happening back there. I know how government agencies reacted to the story coming out, and the phones were tapped and people were followed around and threats were made back then. I know how Los Alamos Lab reacted to my inquiries about his employment. I know what happened when he got into legal trouble here and the stories that he told the courts when he was facing prison time. I believe him. I believe he is telling the story as he knows it. That does not mean it is a literal truth, because we both know that games can be played by the folks who run these kinds of programs. So, I think there was something out there. I think Bob is telling the truth about it. I don't exactly know why it all spilled out as it did, but I hope to one day. John Lear is also a complicated guy. I don't take everything he says literally. But I owe him a debt of gratitude, because way back when I was starting in this stuff, in fact, he got me to do the first UFO program. I had a little talk show called On the Record that we did about a year before I ever met Lazar. And it was incredible. I put him on that little talk show that nobody watches, that aired like 5 o'clock in the morning and had politicians normally on it, and my phone rang off the hook. And I wonder, what the heck is this deal? I mean, I'd always had the same kind of curiosity about UFOs as the next guy, but had John on again, and the response was tremendous, and I realized this is something I've got to look into. This is something that touches the pulse of the public. So I owe John a debt of gratitude in that sense, and he provided me with a great deal of information in the beginning. I do not take everything he says, though, literally.
That makes two of us. I agree with you on all counts. I have interviewed now, I think Bob Lazar 2 or 3 times, and I'll tell you something, George. When you get somebody with a wild story, you interview them once. There it is, and generally the second and third time you interview them, the story grows, and that never happens with Bob. Bob's story is so consistent. His presentation of it is so calm, collected, and the story doesn't grow. It's just what it is, and I believe he's telling the truth.
Well, and plus the fact that he doesn't care whether people believe him or not.
That's right.
He doesn't go out of his way to seek attention about this stuff. You don't want to believe him? Fine. He has nothing.
No, in fact, actually, quite the opposite. He's hard to get to come on the radio at all. It's kind of like, I've told my story. That's it. I'd rather not come on again. But you can sort of drag him on, and when you do, you get the same story. He is right. So consistent. That's
right. I had a chance to fill in for you, Art, when you were in the Philippines, and had Bob on the show. And it was like pulling teeth to get him to do it, but once you get him there and get him rolling, it's good stuff, and it's the same stuff that you heard, almost 18 years ago.
Do you believe that they took element, what was it? I think 115, right? Out of Area 51. Do you think that happened?
That Bob and or cohorts did? Yeah, I do believe it.
Yes.
Yeah, because I saw it. I saw it it was in a leaden container. That was at his house for a time period. I saw some experiments they did with what they call a cloud chamber, how this thing sort of bent light.
I had no idea you'd seen it.
Yeah. When Bob thought he was going to be, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'll go ahead. When Bob thought he was going to be taken out, he had this particle accelerator at his house, and he had this container with the 115 in it right in front of it, and he was ready to flip a switch and say goodbye to Las Vegas, I think. I don't know if that was a dramatic gesture or what it was, but thank God he didn't do it. Now,
I've never heard this.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's not a pretty picture. I've really made some effort over the years, I guess obviously not enough effort to find that stuff because it's obtainable. I think it's obtainable.
There was a movie in which they called something like that unobtainium.
Yeah, right.
It is obtainable. So you actually saw this stuff. You saw some of the experiments. This is really important.
I did. They had it in a lead-cased, disc-shaped container. They also, at one point, had done, like I said, these experiments with this cloud chamber where this it appeared to bend the smoke that was floating around inside this cloud chamber. I couldn't figure out how they did it. I'm not a scientific expert. I guess they could have pulled the wool over my eyes, but they were doing these experiments for themselves, Bob and some of his cohorts, and having fun with it.
Yeah, but see, this is doubted. This is one of the parts of the story very much doubted by many, and so you just sort of put a piece of the puzzle in the truth area that frankly, I wasn't all that sure of. So, wow.
Well, Bob had said they had several 100 pounds of this stuff up there, and of course the scientific community scoffs at that. When Bob first said they had 115 up there, 115 officially did not exist. It does now, right. Although the stuff that was synthesized lasted only a few microseconds and does not sound like what Bob described. Well, he sticks to the story that this would be a different isotope. It's you got to mix different stuff in there for it to stabilize as he saw it.
Yeah. Wow. Do you know what became of the 115 that Bob had?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Proceed.
Well, I don't think I can tell you that. We can talk about it off the air, Art, but I still have sort of a plan in mind. It's going to be difficult, though, so maybe we can do that together.
So the 115 continues to be in existence.
Yeah, and the interesting thing was all the folks who made fun of Bob for that stuff didn't realize that there's this heavy ion research lab in Germany that was calling him up all the time, asking for suggestions and looking for guidance in how they could eventually make the stuff, and they have. Now they've made it.
Oh, my God. All right, we're breaking. We'll be right back. This is Coast. I do live among the creatures of the night. My guest is George Knapp. Colm Kelleher was here in the first hour. George is a institution within the reach of the CBS affiliate here in Las Vegas. Absolutely an institution, actually a legend. And he just delivered a bit of serious breaking news. We'll be right back. All right, I'm going to leave the Area 51 115 part of it for a future conversation. I'm going to ask you, George, how much you know that you have not yet reported on that you keep to yourself? I mean, is there a lot of stuff that you know that you can't or won't talk about?
In regard to 51?
Or
Lazar,
any of this area?
Well, there are some details about that particular story, personal stuff that has not come out. On the subject of 115, by the way, Art, there is in the second series of UFOs stories that I did in 1990. There is a brief snippet of video of the container, and it just is in passing. I don't make any reference to it. It's just sort of a little inside joke. So there's some of that stuff, yeah. There is some stuff about the ranch that has not come out. You know, Colum and I had a debate about it as we were working on the book of how much to include, because some of the things just get so far out there that we worried it was, you know, essentially it's something for everyone to hate. It just gets so, it almost becomes ridiculous at a point. And we debated about whether to leave some of it out. We tried not to, only because, you know, if we censor ourselves because we're worried about looking silly, we're not doing a very good job of telling a story. There are bits and pieces that have not come out, but I think they eventually will.
Okay. Lee in Wasilla, Alaska says, "Hey, Art, just signed up for Streamlink. Love it. Good plug, I guess. First, pass blast. Question about the Gorman Ranch. How much do you think the federal government knows about what goes on there? How much have they tried to find out? Have you had people poking their nose that you think are government types around the ranch?"
Yeah, they've been there since the beginning. Tom Gorman had numerous sightings of these folks on the perimeter of the property. There have been a lot of flyovers, things of that sort. My most recent trip, I found a guy, a rancher, who was a friend of Gorman's and wanted to buy the property himself. They had some investments together, so they're people who know each other real well. He'd been on the property, saw some of these objects floating around, had his own experiences. He was visited in the height of the activity. He got visited by a guy from the U.S. Navy. And I thought, well, you know, this story's not going to go anywhere, as I'm interviewing him about this guy, asking questions about what's really going on the ranch. And then he whipped out a business card, and he gave me the guy's business card. So I wrote all that stuff down. He's a real person. I'm not going to give the name just yet. I can tell it to you privately. But I'm going to track the guy down and see if I can get him to tell me who the heck he was working for. Now, the question arises, I suppose, is the government there monitoring what was going on, or are they causing it? And I think Tom Gorman, the rancher, for a lot of the time he was there, thought it was some sort of a military operation, that the government was doing this, trying to, for some reason, drive him off the property. That's not the conclusion we reached. I mean, because some of the stuff that happened, it's just not something that humans can do. You know, that the scariest stuff, not the monsters, not the UFOs, the scariest stuff to me were the more mundane things that happened on the property. And this I can't imagine some Delta Force commando doing. For example, the mom goes to town. She buys a week's worth of groceries, comes home, takes all the groceries out of the bags, puts it in the cupboard, goes to the bathroom, comes back, and all the groceries are back in the bag. Or she would, every morning she'd take a shower. She locks the door. She puts her towel and her hairbrush on the cabinet. She would get out of the shower, and they're gone. And she'd find like the hairbrush in the freezer, or weird little stuff like that just makes the hair on my arm raise up. And it's the kind of thing that I don't see a commando force or military ops doing that sort of thing.
No, I don't think so. Although, you know, you just have to wonder if I don't know. I guess it would be a way of diverting attention if they could accomplish something like that. But as you point out, that kind of thing, no.
Well, plus the fact that it's been going on for so long. I mean, the military isn't responsible for the UFOs that were flying around there 50 or 100 years ago.
That's right. All right. Your reports, as much as anything else in the world on Area 51, have caused, you know, I get these calls all the time. Art, I'm going to go to Area 51. I'm going to take some friends of mine. We're going to crash and get our way into Area 51. Do you have any advice for these folks that think they're going to crash their way into Area 51?
Don't try it. You're out of your mind. I mean, it is a secure location. A lot of people have tried that. They get in trouble. They get caught. They have sensors all around the facility. I've heard bits and pieces of stories of people who have tried. I only know of one that got in, and that was this guy who walked all the way across the test site from the other side, looking for evidence that the 49ers had traveled across Papoose Lake, and eventually he found it. And he managed to evade all that. He's dying of cancer now, perhaps from radiation exposure while he was out there, but he's the only one I know that's ever managed to do it. I really strongly advise against that sort of thing.
I remember working for KDWN in Las Vegas, George, during the years they were still doing the tests, and we'd go on the air and say, look, there's going to be a test at such and such. We're now warning people on high buildings and precarious locations to get down, and then, of course, there would be, a nuclear-induced earthquake. And so that went on for years and years and years. Do you know anything at all about how dangerous it still might be to go trekking across that ground?
Well, there are hot spots out there. I think there are radioactive waste sites as well that you can see on test site maps. I mean, they map it out and spell it out pretty clearly. I think most of the above-ground tests, those areas are pretty safe, but there are bad spots out there. There's no question about it. Plus, they're testing all sorts of other things. They have different programs that they're trying to find a use for the test site, materials programs, chemicals, things of that sort. That goes on out there, and there's dangerous stuff. I mean, it's a national security installation for a reason.
I'm sure. Do you have any insight? Are you able, for example, to occasionally, because you've been on this story for so many years, even when you're not on it, you're on it, and I would imagine that an Area 51 employee who wanted to talk would find you. Have they?
Sure. More than 24 of them over the years.
Wow.
Some of them I did not find credible, but the 24 I'm talking about are people who I did find credible and who had little bits and pieces and weren't trying to make more of it than they should. Sure, they find me on occasion. It's been a while since any have come forward. That program, like I said, I can't imagine that anything is still out there. And I suspect that they may think that I'm monitored in some way, and if they had information and wanted to come forward, might think twice about it. But yeah, I get them.
You probably are monitored.
I don't doubt it. For a while, I certainly was, because some of the guys who were following me around for a while told me about it years later. So I'm not sure that they still tune in, but maybe they're listening to all of us.
I'm sure they listen to this program. I've assumed for years that my phones were tapped, and I still assume that. I just assume it, and I'm sure yours were, but you actually talked to people who had been assigned to follow you?
Yeah, they sort of laughed about it. This was 6 or 7 years after the Lazar stuff sort of peaked.
Huh. Well, if the Lazar story was pure fabrication, if the Lear stuff was complete fabrication, then why assign anybody at all from the government to follow you?
Yeah, it's curious. The phones, there was clear evidence that the phones were being monitored at the TV station, and it really bothered me at the time. But I had 6 different people who called offering to give me bits and pieces of information who, right after it, were visited by various entities and told to shut the hell up.
Mm-hmm.
And I verified those. One of them even used to work for the TV station. He had been at 51 and offered to give me an interview with his face blacked out, and the very next morning he's followed to work by guys speaking into telephones and microphones and stuff, and followed home, and he got scared. I had a lady who works for the local court system who had previously been a secretary for a test site contractor, one of the big companies out there, who said that she had transcribed this meeting where they discussed crashed saucers, recovered discs and bodies, and she, wow, through a third party, a police officer, had agreed to meet with me and tell me the story. And the very next day after we had our initial phone conversation, she gets a visit from these 2 guys, supposedly from her former employer, who first of all reminded her that she still was under some sort of security restrictions. And then they said, "We know that you travel back and forth to see your daughter in Los Angeles and that she comes here. We'd hate to see an accident happen to either one of you." Well, Yikes. She was petrified.
Yeah, of course.
And like I said, that happened 6 times in a row, and I don't think it's a coincidence.
Now, I know there are signs in the area that say lethal force. I guess there are still signs saying lethal force can be used if you go beyond this point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Do you think that for somebody who might want to tell a tale the government is prepared to use lethal force no matter where it needs to be applied.
I don't think so. I mean, they've had so many intrusions out there, and you recall that, at the edge of the base is 11, 12 miles from the main facilities itself. You'd have to, so they have a lot of leeway there. There's a big buffer zone, and they know you're there. So they don't need to shoot you as soon as you cross the border, and mostly what they do is detain people and then call the Lincoln County Sheriffs and haul you away.
Right.
I've heard the wild stories about shooting out tires and things of that sort. I've seen video that they will buzz you. They've buzzed me in helicopters and will chase you out of there if it comes to it. But I don't think they'd shoot you unless they really had to, and you were barreling along in your Winnebago intent on getting out on the flight line or something.
Right, but they do have that official authorization.
Oh, they do. Yeah, it's written. I don't know what the U.S. code is, but it's written right there on the warning signs all over the base.
Would you say you're convinced or close to convinced that at one time they had UFOs? They had alien craft there.
Yeah, I think so. I think they had something that looks like it. And as I said, enough of the people, in addition to Lazar, have said that we were taking them apart to figure out how they worked. And if it makes a lot of sense on another level that if in fact there is recovered technology like that, and of course in ufology there are many, many stories about that sort of thing, some of them very well documented, the Roswell case coming to mind. If you, in fact, you had that stuff, then Area 51 would be a logical choice where you would take it.
Sure.
Now as a result of the stories and the coverage you've given it and I've given it, there are still thousands of people every year who make the trek out into the desert to see whatever is flying around out there. People have suggested, well, maybe this is disinformation to divert attention away from something else that was flying around out there. Well, if so, then it's been a miserable failure because it has attracted far more attention, the UFO stories, than they ever could have possibly imagined. I mean, every major news organization in the world has been there. You can't hardly turn on the television without an Area 51 special airing at some time of the day or night. And as I said, people are still going out there. So if they didn't want attention for something they had going on out there, that was a bad call.
I had quite a number of interviews. I was lucky to have interviewed Colonel Corso a number of times before his death. Now, he maintained that as a result of Roswell, there was a lot of recovery. There was recovery of all kinds of technical stuff that was slowly then, in fact, it was his job to filter this stuff into U.S. industry in a quiet kind of way. Do you buy into that?
Well, I do. I met Colonel Corso in, I think, 1992, which was, 5 years before the Roswell anniversary, 5 years before the rest of the world heard about him. We had a deal for him to come out here, and I was going to interview him on camera, and that didn't happen. A couple of years later, I told Bob Bigelow about that story, and he arranged to go back and meet Corso and to hear his story. I have a copy of his original manuscript, which is far different from what eventually was published. And we checked him out. We did a lot of legwork to find out that he was who he said he was, that he worked where he claimed to work, and that it was entirely possible, and supported by, I think, the memoirs of his commanding officer, General Trudeau, that this really did happen. Now, I know that there are problems that people have with subsequently what happened to the material and how things like the computer chips and fiber optics developed and who should get the credit. I'm not going to jump into that. I just don't know enough about it. But I find Colonel Corso, I found him to be honorable and believable, and and if in fact that stuff happened, and if our government had it, the military had it, then it would have ended up at Area 51 eventually. That would be my guess.
Okay. You said the manuscript was substantially different. Can you document any ways that are important for us?
Not quite as ambitious in its scope in claiming the different technologies that we know so well today, that all of them developed directly from recovered stuff from crash sites. That's the main thing. It just wasn't quite as expansive, and I did not find that Colonel Corso was quite the dashing swashbuckler that he became in later years. It just seemed a lot more ambitious when it finally came out. Now, Bill Burns, who has been on your show many times, I find him to be a very credible guy. He's the one to put these questions to because he knows a lot more about it. But like I said, it was a much more modest version, the one I read.
Okay. Next to Roswell, and certainly in modern times, the Phoenix Lights, close by to us. In fact, we actually had sort of an offshoot sighting in Las Vegas, as you well know, from the Phoenix Lights. Seems to be the most modern, big occurrence. You looked into the Phoenix Lights, obviously. What did you conclude?
Well, I looked into it somewhat. I would hate to be, an expert, considered an expert on it. I looked at it somewhat, and I don't know. I really can't tell. I know that those videos don't look like flares to me. They don't operate like flares. I think the military really screwed up in their explanation for this thing, first by saying nothing and then coming up with this lame excuse about training operations and exercises. I don't think those look like training exercises to me, the videos I've seen. So I think it was something else, whether it's from way out there, I don't know, or whether it's some secret military plane. I mean, people are seeing a lot of these giant black triangles all over the country. NIDS did an excellent study on that, by the way, before the operation sort of faded. But it sounds to me like we've got something like that.
We, as you know, I saw that triangle. I saw it so close, George, I could have thrown a rock at the damn thing. It came directly over my head and that of Ramona, and then just sort of kept going, floating across the valley. It certainly wasn't flying. It was floating. It's real, whatever it is. Do you have any insight on these triangles?
Well, it seems to be some sort of a weapons platform, an observatory platform of some sort. One of the stories I had heard from some intelligence folks is that it's basically sucking up data, that it flies over and sucks up computer records and phone records and intercepts all kinds of electronic communications and just sucks it up and analyzes it. That's one version. I can't tell you if that's true or not, but it would seem to me it makes a lot of sense. I mean, these things have flown slowly over American cities. If it's a secret project, that doesn't seem very smart to it exposed to that kind of thing. There are trajectories that have been analyzed by NIDS that show sort of the most common routes for these things involve air routes between different military bases, Air Force bases. So nothing definitive, but I suspect we've got something like this. Doesn't mean all the ones that we see like this are ours.
Well, what I saw wasn't flying. The only explanation could be it was a lighter-than-air craft of some sort. There was no noise. It was going so slowly, it must have been doing 30, 35 miles an hour at the most, maybe less. And no noise, big, metallic-looking, not flying. I mean, you got to put enough air under something for lift. It wasn't doing that. It was floating. So either it was lighter than air or it was defying gravity. I have no idea which, but it was doing that.
Well, there is a paper trail of our military requesting those exactly a craft just like that for transport or whatever, asking that these things be developed. Now, whether they have, I don't think there's a smoking gun on that, but it would make sense that we might want something like that. Now, does it mean that, because some of these things float as you described, but I've also heard descriptions of them floating for 1 minute and then zoom, taking off in the next.
That's right.
Yeah. I really don't know what to make of it.
All right. We've covered a lot of ground. When we get back from the break, which is rapidly arriving, we're going to open the phone lines for George Knapp. Now, please, folks, if you can, make your questions relevant. They can cover an awful lot of territory because that's exactly what we've done. From the high desert and the great American Southwest, I'm Art Bell.